Hey everybody, what's going on? Hexlex here, got another Master Duel video for you. So today we're going to be taking a look at Ishizu Branded here for the start of Season 16. I decided to go with a little bit of a different variation of the build than I showed off last time, and you can even see in the title that this is more of a quote-unquote all-gas Ishizu Branded. Now what exactly that means is I've basically cut some of our more reactive stuff, things like Ash Blossom and Nibiru, Imperms, that kind of a thing, and put in more cards that kind of just accelerate us towards our game plan. Our game plan, of course, being to run out our Mirror Jade, ideally with a Dragostepelia, maybe a Taxman or two, and then just control the game through advantage from there. So, a couple of things that have come in to kind of help us with that. We're now playing 3 Allure of Darkness, as well as 3 Pot of Desires. This one, to me, honestly, I was a little bit surprised. I was going through a lot of the more recent Branded Despia decks that were on Master Duel meta, and just looking at the deck breakdown overall, I was surprised to see just how many Branded Despia decks were playing a set of Pot of Desires, especially more recently. So, decided to try it for myself. I don't think I really activated it that many times or saw it, but you know, the couple of times I did, it wasn't too bad. I mean, to be fair, Branded Despia is a deck that really cares about card advantage and getting a lot of it. So, in a way, it does make sense for Pot of Desires to fit right in. And of course, the Banishing 10 doesn't really hurt this deck too much. I mean, the only, like, one of that would really hurt to banish, and even then you could still play around this, is like Ad Libitum. But, I mean, other than that, you know, you play 3 of your most important cards, and you really don't need too many of them in order to win. Usually, it just takes, like, Branded Fusion plus Polymerization. Like, the advantage and the disruption you get off of those 2 cards alone, that often is enough to just carry you to victory right there. So the deck really has a lot of advantage, not just card advantage, but play advantage in that regard, that they don't need too many cards in order to make some back-breaking plays. You know, it's funny too, I'm looking at like the Master Duel meta tier list and just like the overall representation of decks that have hit Diamond and have done well in these tournaments, and you know, as of recording this anyway, Master Duel meta ranks Ishizu Branded a decent bit above Pure Sprite as the top tier 1 deck, and I don't know that I necessarily disagree with that. You know, usually when it comes to Master Duel meta's tier list, of course, we always got to consider that that is only going to factor in tournaments, but even when you think about like Diamond Ladder and stuff, the Ishizu stuff, I think, boosted this deck a lot more than a lot of people initially realized, myself included. I mean, you know, I thought Adamantipator and Dragon Link were going to be the big winners off of the Ishizu stuff coming in before tiers, but it definitely seems like the Ishizu Branded deck is the one that's kind of like rising above all the others, and I do think that the Herald of Orange Lights does have a lot to do with that as well. Definitely want to have our fun playing 3 copies of this card while we can. It's definitely a good thing that it's going to 1. You know, it's like I talked about in my ban list analysis video. This card is, I mean, it really is the Ishizus that are like the most powerful, but Herald of the Orange Light is just ready to be used and abused in just about any good fairy deck, as we saw with Drytrons last year as well. So it's probably a good thing this card is going to 1. I don't know, it's just like, it's funny, right? I think about it, I compare it to Gamma in my head a lot. It's like, I think it's interesting that Herald of Orange Light at 1 feels fine, but Gamma at 2 feels like it could go up to 3. And Gamma is like the more generic one. It really is the Ishizus, and in that regard, you know, a lot of people say on ban lists you should hit the problem cards and not the cards that end up aiding the problem cards, and you could make that argument with Herald of Orange Light, but I honestly, I don't know, it's like, I just feel like there's going to be another good fairy deck, and then all of a sudden, Orange Herald's going to be like a huge problem again. Because the thing is too, right, Gamma might be more generic, but at the very least it does have a pretty firm condition, right? Not controlling any monsters to get your negate and destroy is a pretty big deal. And I mean, you get the bonus having the bodies on board, but like, I don't know about like 90% of the time, but maybe more like 75-80% of the time, that doesn't really matter. But with Herald of Orange Light, you know, there's not really any conditions, of course, other than having another fairy monster in your hand. And you could argue that the other fairy monster is like a cost to send as well, but you know, as we're seeing with the Ishizu cards, that's, I mean, even the Shufflers, getting a Shuffler engraved along with a negation is so good. That's pretty much getting another negation set up as well. So, yeah, I don't know. Even if all the Ishizu cards went to 1, do I still think Herald should be at 1? That's actually a really interesting question, and honestly one I would have to think more about, but in any case, let's see, what else is different about this build? Not a whole lot. I did put in a third Frightfur Patchwork. Oh, the extra deck's a little bit different too. I decided to try out the Earth Golem Ad Ignister over the Muddy Mud Dragon, as well as Predaplant Vert Anaconda, but neither have come up so far. I mean, I guess I'll keep trying them and seeing what I prefer. I did kind of miss having the Alba Lanatus in the extra deck. I did have myself, I found myself a couple of times sending some cards off of Mirror Jade when the game got a little grindy that I would have preferred not to. So I think I'll drop one of those two. Well, it's probably going to be the Predaplant Vert Anaconda. In theory, in the 60 card build, it's actually good to have the Vert Anaconda because there are some situations where all you really have are just 2 random effect monsters, but at the same time, despite being a 60 card deck, I've had no trouble consistently opening into my plays with this deck. So that could be variance, that could very easily be luck. Of course, it will require more testing, but I don't know, at the same time, like, the Earth Golem is, I like it in theory, of getting rid of, you know, IP plus Sprite Elf, or being good against, like, Math Mech, but in my experience, I just feel like the Muddy Mud Dragon just tends to come up more. But again, further testing, we'll go ahead and see how we like this setup here. So, alright, the thing that's everything I want. Oh, and Foolish Burial. For some reason, I wasn't playing Foolish Burial, I don't think, in my last build, so yeah, that's absolutely in now. Oh, and then of course, I just remembered the last one too. Keeper of Dragon Magic. I initially wanted to try 2 copies of this card, but in order to fit everything else I wanted to test, I went down to 1. I see a lot of builds playing this card. I think in the 60 card build, that definitely makes sense. If it's like 40 to even 50 cards, you probably just still don't really have room to play. And you probably also don't need the Keeper of Dragon Magic, but I like the idea of having 1 or 2 of these in the 60 card build. Discarding a card, you might ask, like, well, why don't you just play more Springans Kitt? But discarding a card can actually matter a lot more, as opposed to just, like, putting a card back from your hand. Because, let's see, is this when it's sent off of a card effect? No, it's just when it's sent. Yeah, you can pay this for a cost. So, that's another way to trigger the Ishizu cards. And you can also, of course, discard the Ishizus off of Albaz as well. Although that, of course, rarely comes up. But still worth noting. Okay, so now I think that's everything that I wanted to say about... Oh, and then Edge Imp Chain. That was the other one. I was like, there's one other card that's good to discard off of these effects. What is it? It's Edge Imp Chain, of course. And then Lubellion can, of course, proc the Edge Imp Chain and the Ishizus by discarding 2. So, alright. Now let's break the build down card by card and then look at some gameplay. So we're playing 1 Despian Comedy, 3 Despian Tragedy, 3 Herald of Orange Light, 3 Maxx, 3 Edge Imp Chain, 1 Fairy Tale Snow, 1 Keeper of Dragon Magic, 3 Fallen of Albaz, 2 Aluber the Jester of Despia, 1 Springans Kitt, 2 Keldo the Sacred Protector, 3 Mudora the Sword Oracle, 2 Kelbek the Ancient Vanguard, 2 Agido the Ancient Sentinel, 1 Dramaturge of Despia, 1 Albion the Shrouded Dragon, 1 Ad Libitum of Despia, 2 Polymerization, 1 Foolish Burial, 3 Allure of Darkness, 3 Pot of Desires, 2 That Grass Looks Greener, 3 Frightfur Patchwork, 3 Branded Fusion, 2 Super Polymerization, 2 Called by the Grave, 2 Branded Opening, 2 Branded in Red, 1 Branded Banishment, and then finally 1 Branded Retribution that will round out the main deck for the extra deck. We are on 1 Earth Golem Ad Ignister, 1 Starving Venom Fusion Dragon, 1 Predaplant Dragostepelia, 2 Albion the Branded Dragon, 1 Despian Comedy, 2 Masquerade the Blazing Dragon, 2 Mirror Jade the Iceblade Dragon, 2 Lubellion the Searing Dragon, 2 Guardian Chimera, and then 1 Predaplant Vert Anaconda. Alright, there's our deck. Now let's look at some gameplay. Alright, so our first game here is going to be against a Therion Punk deck. Now, one of the reasons that I wanted to play with Ishizu Branded is not just to, of course, get in the deck profile for the new season, but I've also had a lot of fun playing this deck, even just for videos, and I'm kind of interested in potentially playing it in some tournaments or just, general play beyond that. So I want to practice for the deck and get a little bit better. So, this is one of those decks that has a really high skill ceiling, so I definitely need the practice. You might see me make some minor misplays here and there, but that's all just part of the learning process. So, looking at what we milled off of grass, I'm actually really liking what I see here. We managed to get a Shuffler in the graveyard. Did we get a Keldo as well? We do, so we have 2 Shufflers. That's pretty nice. Of course, the mills are also nice to give us free information about our opponent's deck. Here we see they're on likely a pretty dedicated Therion build because they have the Therion Cross in their graveyard, in addition to the Lily Borea as well. So, looking at else we milled here, we do also see the Branded Retribution. This is really good because in the right circumstance, it potentially acts as a searcher. And indeed, we do have the Branded Banishment in our graveyard, so we could end up getting that and setting that up with our Branded in red as well. We could also just bounce back the Branded Fusion. Either way. We also did just open Branded in red, so overall our hand is looking pretty good here. We did have to use Springans Kitt to find the Branded Fusion, so we lost a little bit of card advantage doing that, but it's really not that big of a deal in the long run, honestly. So we're going to add the Ad Libitum of Despia. Now, one thing that you do have to note is that because we're going to end up using Branded in red to fuse, it's going to end up banishing the materials, including the Ad Libitum here. So that is something that I maybe could have considered a little bit more, as it means that I won't be able to use my Ad Libitum on the next turn because it'll be banished. It won't be in my graveyard. So I still think this play was fine, but it is something that I didn't consider in the moment. But yeah, we're going to make a Dragostepelia. If I'm only going to make one monster in addition to Mirror Jade on my first turn, then what I usually like to do is make the Dragostepelia. If I can make two, then I'll make double Taxman, but otherwise I value the monster negate a little bit higher. So yeah, we end up getting back the Branded Banishment, and then we set up a Branded in red as well. So, and then of course by fusing, or not fusing for, but special summoning a new Mirror Jade, we end up, of course, refreshing, quote-unquote, the effect too. So this is where I do end up making a bit of a misplay, because not only am I not able to really make oh no, I can still make Guardian Chimera, I have enough cards, but no, the misplay here was actually that, again, I end up using my Ad Libitum and banishing it last turn, so I thought I had it in my graveyard, just was on autopilot mode in my head. So we end up, I guess, in a way, kind of losing out on a Mirror Jade banish here, but I mean, also, I think the Branded in red, again, was a fine turn one play as well, so... Also, I chained the Branded in red there, so that way the Guardian Chimera chain link would proc before my opponent had a chance to activate Ziamin's effect. So we end up getting a live Orange Herald off of that, so that's pretty nice. Yeah, rather than negating the Regulus with the Orange Herald, I decided to just use the Mudora here. I didn't think I was going to get too many better... I mean, it's Therion, so maybe I was going to have some better opportunities to use a Shuffler, but... At the same time, I kind of wanted to save the Orange Herald. Plus, I mean, yeah, the Regulus threatens to beat over the Dragostepelia, but not much else beyond that. This is another minor misplay on my part, honestly. I thought, it was just me not paying enough attention. I thought my opponent was activating Ziamin's effect. I didn't realize it was a Foxy tune they already had in hand, but my opponent's just going to chain the Regulus anyway, so I guess in that regard, it wouldn't have super mattered. I was really afraid that they were going to synchro for Psychic and Punisher. That's why I wanted to get the Ziamin off the field, but we ended up getting the Regulus off the field instead, so that ended up being fine. Once again, my opponent's got some graveyard effects. I'm just going to use the other Shuffler in my graveyard, the Keldo, to more or less negate those. Then they're going to sync for what I assume is going to be a Chaos Ruler. Yep, it does end up being Chaos Ruler, the Chaotic Magical Dragon. And this can activate, that's fine. I still have my Branded Banishment face down, so... it's not going to be pretty, it's going to be pretty easy for me to answer this board, and, yeah, the Chaos Ruler is fine because we can just go ahead and negate it with the Dragostepelia. I know I said this can activate, it's fine, but no, we are going to negate it, so. This is the search that's going to end up activating the No Punk Ziamin, but with no other cards in hand, there's not really a whole lot they can search out here. This point is waiting for the battle phase to flip up Branded Banishment. And, yeah, once the Asa comes down... you know, I realize, like, oh, they're probably just going to end up going for an access code here, right? So I'll just wait until the summon of the access code resolves, and then we'll go ahead and do it. But no, they actually end up overlaying for the Zombie Vampire. And you might be wondering, well, how do they do that with Mudora and Chaos Ruler? Is that something, like, Asa doesn't change the level? No, it doesn't. That's actually something with Zombie Vampire, and this comes up very rarely in Adamanticators, but it can matter, too. If it's the first line here, if you use a monster with a level that is owned by your opponent, it's treated as level 8. So definitely something to keep in mind. It's something I always like kind of forget about with Adamanticators. I wonder if there's times where I could have gone for Zombie Vampire and missed it as a result. But yeah, in any case, I'm definitely going to flip up Branded Banishment here. I thought Access Code Talker was going to be what came down, but Zombie Vampire is still fine because either way on the resolution of that Dark Monster summon, I'll flip up Branded Banishment. and then I can just fuse it away from their field for the Star Venom. At that point, they'll only have an Asa and a field spell, both of which they've already used, and of course, as a result, my opponent is going to end up conceding here. Alright, so there's that game. Let's go and take a look at the next duel. Alright, so now we're going to have a game against Sky Strikers, and if I recall correctly, I think my opponent's going to actually go first here. But I was looking at their deck, and it's weird. It seemed like more of a standard / go second Sky Striker build, but I can never figure out when I see Sky Striker opponents go first, and they're on a, like, you know, they're not playing like Therions or stuff. I always wonder, like, wait, am I the one who's doing it wrong by going second, or are they doing it wrong? I can never figure that out, but in any case, pretty standard, you know, Sky Striker opening turn. They're going to lead with the Shizuku grabbing an engage. Looks like they had to use their Mobilized Engage in order to get that set up. That's not necessarily a bad thing, because it does already set up a couple of spell cards in their graveyard. And they have a couple of back rows here as well. So, I'm going to start by drawing on my turn. I'll begin with the Keldo here. I decided to activate the Kelbek, although it wasn't like the most obvious decision in the world, because, as I just pointed out, our Sky Striker opponent does already have 2 spell cards in their graveyard, so if we mill with Kelbek, we're just going to put a 3rd one in their graveyard. Like, there's no way we don't. They'd have to get very, very unlucky for us to not hit a spell off their top 5. And at that rate, you know, one of their face-down cards, likely Widow Anchor, and then potentially Shark Cannon, they can potentially start stealing our stuff. So that might start getting scary. But at the same time, you know, I'm looking at this hand, like, this hand's absolutely insane. But an Ash Blossom would wreck this hand super hard, because although this hand is insane, it does really need the Branded Fusion to resolve to really, really get going. So, ultimately, I, like, weighed the pros and cons of it in my head, and I ultimately ended up deciding that it's worth it to mill my opponent's top 5 to test for Ash Blossom in this case. So, we're going to activate the Kelbek. Opponent doesn't have a negate, and I don't think they got a prompt to respond either. They actually only end up milling 1 spell, so we almost actually missed putting 3 spells in their graveyard. But once 3 spells were in their grave, and I saw the Agido, I was like, yeah, I'll activate Agido too. It doesn't matter anymore at this point. 3 spells is really the only thing I was concerned about for Sky Strikers having stuff in the graveyard. So they've got a Widow Anchor. We also have the Branded in red as well. They have a Solemn Judgment for it. That's completely fine though, because now not only do I know that my opponent doesn't have any more disruption, like they haven't gotten priority to respond for, you know, checking for things like Maxx and Ash Blossom. So, you know, I know they don't really have anything in their hand. Now their back row's gone, and I still haven't even, as you can see, used my Branded Fusion yet. On top of that, I get to fuse for a Guardian Chimera that's going to, you know, start picking off their monsters, draw me more cards. I get to summon a Dramaturge. This is, like, what I really like about this game now, or this game. Well, yeah, this game, I love Yu-Gi-Oh, but this deck, game hand deck, you know, whatever. But yeah, this deck is pretty rad because, like, I mean, as you can see, even without the Branded Fusion, like, to just secure lethal, although I guess, you know, because my opponent's Solemn, I still had lethal, but if my opponent had not paid after life points, and if I had not had Branded Fusion, I would still be with what looked like a pretty mediocre hand in a very advantageous position, right? We would be in a spot where we'd have the 2 cards who drew off Guardian Chimera, our opponent's only got 2 cards in hand, and then we've got a Dramaturge and a Guardian Chimera beating them just in their face. And again, the Branded Fusion really just secured game here, which, again, we did have anyway because our opponent Solemn Judgmented. But I don't know if anybody else thinks about games this way, but I will often think about games, wins or losses, this way. Some people will kind of fall into this, like, it's easy to fall into this mental trap of, like, I would have won if, but I do think there is merit into thinking about how games could have gone differently, right? In the way that I kind of just, like, talked about there. Like, and I like to do that with my wins, too. I'm like, okay, if things had gone a little worse for me, would I still have been fine? And in a lot of ways, I think that is actually merits more thought than necessarily, like, you know, I could have won if. But again, looking for outs to where you could have won in a situation where you could have lost is also a good practice to have as long as you do so constructively. But we do still have a couple more duels to look at, so let's go straight into the next one here. Alright, our next game is going to be against Sword Soul Tenyi. Good old Sword Soul Tenyi. Still a stalwart force in the meta, as it has always been. Hopefully tournaments don't push it out too far. I think we all just kind of have a soft spot for Sword Soul at this point. I mean, it is the most fair feeling. That's a weird phrase. But that made sense, right? Fair feeling of all the decks. I don't know, but speaking of fair, or rather the lack thereof fairness, we opened Maxx, so that's pretty nice to have that going second. We actually opened 2, so even if things don't go well this turn, we have that for the next turn. And indeed, I was scared about this Patchwork getting Ash Blossomed. Our opponents don't always do that, but if our opponent had in this situation, it would have been really bad for us. Who's going to retaliate with a Maxx of their own? That's very annoying. I mean, I'm not one to I can't complain in this situation because, of course, I fired off the Maxx as well, but I already don't think I could have gotten lethal on this turn anyway, so it's actually probably not that big of a deal. Even though I could search an Aluber here, I have already used my normal summon. I had to do that for the Mudora because, yeah, I had to have a monster on my hand and field in order to fuse for the Guardian Chimera, which I wanted to get Guardian Chimera out here to give to my opponent's back row because, yeah, I knew it was Blackout. You know, there didn't seem to be a reason for them to summon Moye and then pass. Like, I feel like if it wasn't Blackout, if it was a random card like Imparm, you would either just hold the Moye and try to use it next turn, or you would set it, because then at least in defense mode it might save you as a chump blocker to take a hit that would be lethal. So summoning in attack mode with one face down was just a telltale sign to me that they had the Blackout. So trying to fire off the Maxx here. Our opponent does have the Ash Blossom though. I decided not to use the Herald of Orange Light because I wanted to negate and destroy something like a Moye instead of just letting my Maxx resolve. That probably looked a little bit weird. I bet a lot of you were thinking, like, why did you not Herald of Orange Light there? But again, with Sword Soul Tenyi, you know, and I kind of debated talking about Sword Souls in my choke points video. Maybe I should have. Or no, I did, but I should have talked about this a little bit more in detail. But with Sword Soul Tenyi, you know, usually if you can negate the effect of their Moye or Taya they normal summoned, in a lot of situations, like, that's enough to stop them completely. Now, my opponent is on their first turn where they can attack, and my thought process was, like, you know, even if I Maxx here, I know I don't have stuff like Ash Blossom and Nibiru or Valor in this deck to get with that can actually stop them. There's really only the Herald of Orange Light, which I already have, so that's why I let the Ash Blossom negate my Maxx there. I was looking to see if there was going to be a better opportunity for me to just stop my opponent's play, as opposed to trying to deter them from playing with the Maxx. But again, if my opponent takes the Maxx challenge, which they're much more likely to now, you know, I really don't have a whole lot else I can put up here. So I also thought, because, you know, I've got the Shufflers here, I can just put back my opponent's Tenyi stuff. They did actually end up having, though, to my surprise, Vessel of the Dragon Lords, which, cycle, rather, Vessel for the Dragon Cycle, which is not particularly common in Sword Soul Tenyi nowadays, but it actually ended up being really good here, because it not only allowed them to set up another Ashina in their graveyard, but it also gave them the Adhara to go to another Monk, even after I bounced their Monk with the Kelbek in my hand. Again, the Kelbek in my hand as well. I was, like, sure I had enough responses in hand to just stop anything my opponent was going to do. Might have been a bit of hubris on my part, but to be fair, we do still have the Dramaturge and the Herald of Orange Light live here. Opponent's going to try to target the Dramaturge with a Vishuda, so I'm going to have to use the Herald now. I want to keep the Dramaturge up in case my opponent tries to summon Bashia or Chi Shao. Unfortunately, if they do get a level 10 Seeker out, whether it's Baron, Chengying, or Qixing Longyan, I don't think it really matters which one it is. I don't know that I have a whole lot of means to stop it here. Shaman of the Tenyi is going to come down. I decided not to negate it, and I'm really glad that I didn't, because I was looking at my opponent's graveyard, and if they'd had Moye or Taya in the grave, then yeah, I definitely would have negated it, but I decided to call their bluff, and they ended up just normal summoning a Taya right afterwards. So now I'm definitely going to negate with the Dramaturge of Despia here to stop them from searching with the Chi Shao. In theory, between the Dramaturge and the Guardian Chimera, I should have enough muscle on board to stop this. However, I failed to remember that, oh yeah, my opponent just gets to send a Moye with the Shaman of the Tenyi, and they did not only have another word monster to reveal, but it's even also Protoss, so the opponent actually just ended up having everything they needed here. So in hindsight, the reason I wanted to keep this game in is because I wanted to evaluate a replay and try to evaluate that play of, you know, not negating the Maxx there. it's really easy to look at this replay and think, well, yes, you should have Herald of Orange Lighted the, or not the Maxx, the Ash Blossom negating my Maxx. It's really easy in hindsight to look at this game and be like, oh yes, if you had used Herald of Orange Light against the Ash Blossom to let your Maxx resolve, you would have had a much higher chance of winning this duel. But again, in the moment, you know, it's more important to think about, like, in the moment, was that the right decision with the information you had available at that time? That's what you need to really critically evaluate replays, is just keeping in mind, like, was that the best decision? Not after knowing what happened, but in that moment before we could have known that what was going to happen. I think where my thought process did waver a bit is I did catch myself thinking, oh, they didn't do a whole lot last turn, so maybe they won't have plays this turn. But of course, the reason they didn't do a whole lot last turn is because I Maxx'd on their turn 1. So I should have considered that more for sure. Thinking back now, I don't know. I still think you could really make an argument either way in that situation. Because, like, I don't know. I almost find myself caught between two biases, right? Where I have the bias of, you know, wanting to defend the position I had taken and saying, yes, I thought I had enough disruption. But then, of course, there's also the bias of knowing the result that I was talking about earlier, where I'm like, well, now that I know what ended up happening, I should have negated it. So it's like, I don't know, you do have to be mindful of those kind of biases that we tend to have when you want to critically evaluate game, especially your own gameplay. Definitely got to keep that in mind to always try to be as objective as possible in doing so. But we still have another duel to look at. Let's go ahead and go straight into that one. And our final game here is going to be against good old Sprites. It's a very standard Sprite build. Not really a lot of text aside from, like, Apuria and Lightning Storm. You know, another random level 2, another board breaker, so on and so forth. So we get to take the first turn here. Open with the Keeper of Dragon Magic, which is kind of cool. I get to try that out. And I also opened with a lot of good cards to discard off of it. My opponent also opened with a Maxx, so we're just going to end up more or less stopping here. But I will still activate the effect of the Kelbek that I resolved, because I want to see what my opponent's up to. And when we look at their graveyard, it's pretty obvious. Oops, sorry about that, an alarm going off. Let me go ahead and make sure that that's not going to happen again. Alright, sorry about that. But yeah, so we look at our opponent's graveyard, and it's pretty obvious they're on Sprite. We see the Nimble Beaver and the Swap Frog here. Looking at what we milled, not a whole lot. Yeah, usually if it's just a random 5 mil, there's a decent chance it won't be a whole lot that's, like, super relevant. But it's really the grass mill for 20 that we really like to see. I mean, that's usually the case with most grass Ishizu decks anyway, but I will admit that the Ishizu Branded does have, as opposed to stuff like Adamant Speeder and Dragon Link, less high, like a lower, what's the word I'm looking for? You have less of a chance to hit a high impact card, a card that has high impact when it gets milled, because we're playing few of them here. So, Keeper of Dragon Magic, I'm going to discard the Edge Imp Chain in order to add the Branded Fusion. That's really nice, because that also lets me add the Frightfur Patchwork. As we mentioned, the deck profile, that is something I really wanted to test with the Keeper of Dragon Magic. And yeah, even though my opponent did play a Maxx on turn 1, I'm still going to play into it here. I decided, you know what, I'll make a Mirror Jade, that's fine. It'll give my opponent a few extra draws, but I think it's worth it to have a more powerful inboard, and it'll also net me advantage too. My opponent is going to end up having Imperm for the Lubellion, which is a little annoying, but at the same time also fine, because now, even though my opponent resolved a Maxx, I actually end up net gaining card advantage on them. Card advantage, as I've discussed before, is about, you know, counting how many cards your opponent has on their hand and field as opposed to how many you have. Card advantage doesn't matter quite as much in Modern Yu-Gi-Oh! As it did in the past, but Branded Despia is a deck that can not only generate a lot of advantage, but because it does, it also cares a lot about card advantage as well. So this is actually a good scenario. This might not look super great, and indeed, it's not, you know, nearly as good as ending on, like, Mirror Jade plus Dragostepelia, but we ended with 3 monsters on our board, one of which has 3,000 defense, so we have a solid board presence to avoid just getting attacked for lethal right off the bat during our opponent's turn. And we have 4 cards in our hand. We have a total of 7 cards to our opponent's 5, which isn't any more than they would have started with anyway. And again, they actually did resolve the Maxx here too. So, all in all, even though we got Maxx'd, I still think this was a very good turn 1, you know, relatively speaking. So, they're going to do their sprite plays. Now, I don't really have any disruption here, aside from the Shuffler in my graveyard, the, what is it, the Mudora, right? Yeah, the Mudora, it's up here. Alright, so they're going to go for their gigantic sprite. Where they switch off of the Jet? Was it the Smashers, I imagine, right? Oh no, they got a Gamma Burst. Okay, so they were trying to go for lethal this turn. This call by was actually very good on my opponent's part. It might look a little weird on the surface, like, wait, why would they call by your Mudora? Because they're just going to chain it, right? And indeed, that is what I do, but I almost debated not, because I suspected my opponent was trying to triple tactics talent me, and that does actually end up being exactly what they do. But honestly, the main reason that I actually let this resolve, or not let this resolve, but the main reason I let the call by resolve and didn't chain my Mudora was because I thought even if my opponent activates triple attack, I think that's fine, right? Because, like, if they draw two, that's actually draw two might be the best mode for them in this exact situation. They decided to put a card back, and looking at my hand, I'm like, I don't care if they put one of these cards back. There's no one card they can put back here that will stop my plays on the next turn. If they want to take one of my monsters, that's fine. These are not really high-impact monsters at all. So, yeah, even though I did have my suspicions my opponent was trying to triple attack, because, again, call by just straight up on a Mudora is obviously never going to work. So, it was pretty obvious what my opponent was up to, but still a fine play here. Then they surprised me by just moving to battle phase and then passing. I think they were trying to summon Zeus there, is what ended up happening, and then they forgot they were 2-locked, which, to be fair, is a mistake I have made plenty of times. I'm not, like, making fun of my opponent for that, but, I don't know, I just think it's weird that my opponent didn't even try to activate the Gigantic Sprite's effect. I mean, even if you didn't realize that you were 2-locked because of the starter, I feel like you would want to advance your own board state more than just like wiping mine, especially after seeing what's in my hand. Like, you know, I can just poly this Tragedy and Edge Imp and then just like start gaining card advantage off of it. Like card advantage, like I was talking about, like not even factoring in whatever I end up drawing for a turn. My next turn is already looking great, because even without the Aluber that they end up putting back for the triple attack, like I said, I can just Polymerization, fuse the Despian Tragedy and the Edge Imp Chain for probably Despian Coratus and not a Taxman there, because Coratus could be relevant in dropping my opponent's stuff to 0, and also if they remove it on my turn, I can just Albaz potentially, and then still not only, you know, keep my plays going, but steal one of their things by fusing with it. And then, yeah, both effects would have triggered. I could have searched the Aluber to summon, because I wouldn't have used my normal summon, to search for the Branded Fusion. Of course, I also would have gotten a Patchwork, which would have gotten me another Edge Imp Chain and another Poly to fuse again. And that's how card advantage really, really assists Branded Despia. So, hope you enjoyed these duels. Hope you learned something from them. Even watching games back, I definitely learned something. That's always the goal in watching our own replays. And again, really trying to evaluate them with an objective and critical standpoint. But that's going to do it. Like I said, let's go ahead and move now to our outro. Alright everybody, thank you so much for watching all the way to the very end of the video like this. That means a whole lot to me. Not just personally, but it's also a great way of supporting the channel as well. If you're interested in supporting the channel in other means, you can of course feel free to comment and or subscribe right here on YouTube. I'm always looking to the comments section. You guys leave some pretty awesome feedback as far as like constructive criticism goes when it comes to deck building, gameplay, channel content, all that stuff. So feel free to leave your opinion down there. I will be sure to take a look at that there. And then subscribing is going to be the best way to get notifications of when these videos drop. That does happen every day, by the way, so if you're looking for daily Master Duel content, you've come to the right place. And there are more places where you can get some daily Master Duel content. If you check out the description below, follow the top link over to my Patreon page. There for just $5 a month, which is as much as you pay for a booster pack, you'll find a lot more value than a pack full of filler over there. We've got some previews for content upcoming here on the channel. We've got some exclusive games that are only posted over on Patreon over there. We've got some Q&As, and then you can also have your name featured in this lovely credit sequence where I thank all of the people who are helping contribute over there on Patreon. It's a huge support to the channel, and it really means a lot as well. So thank you everyone who is donating that is featured here on screen. And again, you know, it's not just a pure donation. You do get some more daily Master Duel content over there just for being a part of the Patreon.
But I think that's about all the time that I have for today's video. Once again, I just want to thank you so very much for sticking all the way to the end of the video. Again, it just means a lot, as I do put a decent amount of work into getting these videos out every single day. But that's about all the time that I've got for now, so without further ado, this is Hexlex. I'm signing out, and I hope you have a fantastic day.